The rotor thumped a steady heartbeat above me, each beat carrying the thin air of the Olympic mountains through the cockpit like a low drum. Afternoon light poured across the ridges in fractured sheets of silver, the kind that sharpened every spruce needle and carved the valleys into dark green hollows. I'd flown these forests for 12 years, long enough to know every glacier, scar, and every meander of the Ho River. Usually, the sky itself felt like an old colleague, predictable, companionable. That day it watched me with a strange, glassy stillness. I kept the helicopter low, 300 feet above the canopy, surveying the serpentine river below for signs of erosion after the recent rains. The headset hissed with the ordinary chatter of base updates, but I barely listened. My eyes kept snagging on the shadows between the trees. The forest floor in late summer carries a particular weight, a velvet black that swallows movement. Yet something flickered there, an abrupt displacement, like a thought cutting across a dream. I steadied the cyclic and leaned forward. A shape slid between the cedars, vast and deliberate. At first, I thought it was a bear standing upright, but the proportions snapped that guess in half. Shoulders too square, stride too long, and it held something against its chest, a long bundle, the dull green of an old army sleeping bag. The figure moved with a surety that ignored the chaos of deadfall and undergrowth, as if the forest itself parted for it. My throat went dry. I'd seen elk crash through thickets and black bears clamber up slopes slick with moss. Nothing moved like this. I reached for the mic but paused, suddenly aware of how small my voice might sound if I broke the moment. The ground below seemed to throb once, like the earth had skipped a beat. "Base, this is Eagle 7, I finally said, forcing calm. Requesting Detective Morrison on channel. The response crackled back, ordinary and unreal. "Copy, Eagle 7, Morrison patched in. "Go ahead." I exhaled through tight teeth. Possible visual on a subject carrying a human-sized object. Coordinates to follow. Silence stretched across the frequency. Then Morrison's voice, measured, skeptical. "You have eyes on someone carrying a body?" "Affirmative." "And it isn't. It isn't like any someone I've ever seen." I banked left, tilting the windshield toward the moving shadow. The creature stepped into a small break in the trees, fully visible now. Nearly 8 feet tall, draped in dark, coarse hair that caught the light in cold sparks. Even from 100 yards, I could sense a weight to it, a density that bent the air. The bundle in its arms sagged like a sleeping person. Through the canopy, I glimpsed the faded green of a sleeping bag, the same description that had haunted search bulletins for Tom Davis, the programmer who'd vanished months earlier. My stomach turned with a slow gravity. It wasn't panic. It was recognition, as if some ancestral memory stirred and whispered, "You know this shape." "Central," I said, voice low. "I have a 2-legged subject, size extreme, carrying what appears to be a person in a green bag." A pause, then Morrison again, brittle now. "Confirmed 2-legged?" "Confirmed, and you're not going to believe its speed." As if to punctuate my words, the figure vaulted a fallen cedar and crossed an open slope with a stride that defied physics. 9, maybe 10 meters at a time, never breaking rhythm. I adjusted altitude, camera already rolling. The helicopter's shadow skimmed the treetops, but the thing below didn't startle or hesitate. It simply continued, each motion economical, silent except for the tremor it left in the foliage. Ahead rose a sheer rock face, streaked with moss and lingering snowmelt. I expected it to stop. Instead, it climbed. Straight up, one powerful reach after another, the bundled body balanced effortlessly against its chest. The motion wasn't frantic. It was methodical, practiced, as though gravity belonged to someone else. Central, I said, the words scraping out. Object ascending vertical cliff while carrying the package. Maintain visual. We have ground teams mobilizing, Morrison answered, but his tone had lost its certainty. I circled wide, the rotor wash rattling the firs. The figure reached a dark hollow halfway up the cliff, a cave mouth veiled in ivy. There it finally paused. With a slow, deliberate grace, it lowered the green-wrapped body onto a flat ledge and began arranging stones around it, not tossing them, placing them, one by one, forming a ring. Base, I whispered, though no one could hear the tremor behind the word. It's building. A circle. The act was so precise it felt ceremonial. Each rock nested against the next, like an ancient pattern remembered by instinct. No animal builds a ring of stones. I recorded every second, heart hammering against the harness. Then, as if sensing the pressure of my gaze, the figure straightened. It turned toward me, lifting one arm until the massive hand faced the helicopter. Not a wave, not a threat, just a gesture of acknowledgement, calm, deliberate, aware. For an instant, the sky seemed to narrow around us, a tunnel of blue where only that dark figure existed. A gaze older than language held me there. I couldn't breathe. A heartbeat later, it pivoted and slipped into the cave. The forest swallowed it whole. I hovered, disoriented, the rotors chopped suddenly thin against the enormous silence. Below, the green bundle lay within its stone circle, perfectly still. Fuel warnings blinked on the dash. 40 minutes left before I'd be forced to return. I banked once more around the cliff, the smell of cold rock and pine resin sharp through the vents, and tried to memorize every contour of the clearing, every fracture of shadow. The camera caught it all, but I needed my own eyes to remember. The third winter after that first sighting arrived with a strange clarity, the kind of cold that polishes the sky until every star feels close, enough to scrape your knuckles. I kept flying, though the official search had wound itself down into paperwork and half-hearted patrols. My routes always drifted near the Ho River without planning to, as if the helicopter itself remembered. Each pass I told myself I was only checking weather patterns, only watching for rockfall. But some part of me was measuring the silence, waiting for the forest to exhale something it had been holding for centuries. Snow crusted the ridgelines like ground, glass when I lifted off one pail. Morning in January. The river below wore a thin rind of ice, and mist clung to the pines in blue ribbons. I followed the familiar course over the cave's coordinates. From above it looked unchanged, just a black seam in the cliff, rimed with frost. Then a faint vibration hummed through the collective, so subtle I thought it was a mechanical quirk. It wasn't. The sound was external, low, and metallic, like the earth tuning a hidden instrument. Every dial on the panel quivered in sympathy, needles swaying though the air around us was still. I banked once, slow. That's when I saw it, a scatter of objects on the snow-flattened meadow east of the cave, arranged in a ring so precise it could have been plotted with compass and string. From this altitude, the pieces glinted like coins in shallow water bits of cloth. A bright thermos, the curved spine of a small cooking pot. Nothing alive moved among them, yet the pattern looked freshly made, unmarred by drift or track. I marked the coordinates and landed at base under a sky the color of forged steel. Morrison met me in the hangar, a wool cap pulled low, his breath smoking like the exhaust. We studied the footage frame by frame, that shimmering circle of domestic scraps. "Another message," he said finally, though his voice held no triumph. Just the fatigue of a man who's run out of ordinary words. By late afternoon, we were climbing toward the site with 2 rangers and a pair of silent dogs. The forest wore its winter weight, heavily branches sagging, snow creaking underfoot like distant doors. When we reached the meadow, the ring lay exactly as on the screen. Each item had been set with an almost ceremonial care. A child's mitten, a cracked compass, a strip of faded flannel tied in a loose knot. No human tracks, only the faint impressions of something broad and deep that pressed into the frozen ground without a defined heel or claw. Inside the circle, the snow was melted to bare earth, as if a warm breath had lingered there long after the storm passed. The dogs refused to cross the ring. One whimpered, the other backed until the leash went taut. Morrison crouched at the edge, gloved hands motionless above the soil. "It's like it wants to be seen," he said quietly, "but not touched." A wind shifted, then no warning. No scent of weather, just a sudden current sliding through the trees. The air smelled of wet granite and something older, like a cellar where time had been sleeping. High on the ridge, a single crack echoed wood on stone or stone on bone. The sound carried an odd rhythm, almost like a call answered by its own reflection. We packed what we could, though part of me hated disturbing the geometry. The flight back felt longer than the hour it took. Clouds closed behind us, sealing the valley as if the sky were pulling a curtain. Weeks passed with the mountain locked in ice. Reports trickled in from nearby towns. Lights seen drifting against the tree line. A moan that made dogs hide under porches. A smell of burned metal after windless nights. Nothing that would survive a line on an official form. I kept flying. One brittle dawn in March, the call came again, a pair of hikers overdue near Lake Kinolden. I lifted before sunrise, the horizon a knife edge of rose. Snow still roofed the trees when a flicker of motion caught my peripheral vision. There, halfway up a granite chute, a dark figure climbed with a pace too deliberate to be a shadow. Empty-handed this time. No bundle, no burden, but it paused midway, turning its head toward the sky with the same measured recognition I'd felt before, as if it knew the exact window of my orbit. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow until only that silhouette existed, tall, fur catching the pale light like tarnished copper, utterly still. Then it vanished into the seam of forest, the space it left behind vibrating with an almost inaudible resonance, the way a bell hums after the strike is forgotten. I circled until fuel made the decision for me. On the flight home, the radios hissed with a static that pulsed in time with my own heartbeat, a subtle syncopation that faded only as the base lights came into view. Back on the ground, Morrison watched the new footage without a word. The tape showed nothing miraculous, just a dark outlined scaling stone, then absence. But the pause before it turned, that slight tilt of the head, was unmistakable. It had looked at me, not at the helicopter. At me. We never found the missing hikers. We found their packs 2 weeks later, clean and dry on a mossed boulder, arranged in a careful V, as if someone had studied human symbols and decided to sign their name. The official reports grew thinner, each one a shrug dressed in jargon. No evidence of foul play. Weather complications likely, but the mountain didn't care about our paperwork. It kept its own archive in rings of stone and quiet gestures, and I knew with a certainty deeper than language that something there understood we were watching and was watching back. Now, when I fly the hoe, I keep the camera running even on clear, uneventful days. I tell myself it's protocol, but the truth is simpler. I'm waiting for another circle, another look from the dark, for the silent acknowledgement that the forest remembers me as surely as I remember it. The thought should frighten me more than it does. Instead, it feels inevitable, like the slow drift of seasons, like gravity itself. The fourth summer since that first impossible sighting led into the mountains. With a heat that smelled of pitch and iron, I'd long stopped, pretending these flights were routine patrols. Each liftoff felt like opening a sealed letter, not knowing if the page inside would be blank or written in a language only the forest understood. The Olympic peaks baked in haze, and the river below wrinkled with slow bronze light. I followed the same arc. I always did an involuntary pilgrimage toward the cliff with the black scene that had bent my life into a question. By now I could chart the place blindfolded, the crooked spine of cedar at the ridge, the rock shelf where the wind funnels a whistle in early morning. Yet that day the air carried a weight I hadn't felt before, a subtle vibration that threaded through the collective stick and up my arms, as if the metal of the helicopter had become a tuning fork. It wasn't sound so much as pressure, like the sky remembering a thunderclap it hadn't made. When the cave came into view, a shock of color cut the gray, a fresh circle of stones on the ledge, tighter than before, each rock bleached white by something hotter than sun. Inside it lay a single object, small and deliberate, a weather-worn ranger badge, the enamel chipped but unmistakable, my own name still engraved across its back. I hovered, breath locked, a thin metallic taste climbing the back of my throat. I'd never lost that badge. It hung in my locker that morning when I left. Somehow the forest had copied it, or borrowed it, or drawn it out of me. I radioed bass, voice low, but halfway through, the cola headset dissolved into a wash of static that pulsed with a slow heartbeat rhythm. Not interference, more like reply. Below, a shadow detached itself from the cave's mouth and stepped into the sun. Even at this distance I knew it, the immense shoulders, the dark pelt catching stray beams like cold fire. Empty-handed, unhurried, it crossed the ledge and stopped at the ring. The air around it seemed to thrum, a quiet gravity that pulled every thought toward silence. It raised one arm, palm outward, the same deliberate gesture I'd seen years ago, but now it held the motion waiting. I should have filmed. Instead, I lifted a hand from the cyclic and mirrored the gesture, my fingertips trembling against the canopy glass. The distance between us felt absurdly thin, a single breath of ancient air. For a moment the mountains hushed, and I sensed not words, not even a message, just an understanding that observation flowed both ways. The wilderness glaring back. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the dark scene, the cave swallowing it without echo. The headset cleared. Wind returned to its ordinary rush. The stones and badge remained, but the weight in the air had shifted, as if something final had been exchanged. I circled once, twice. Fuel warnings blinked, but I couldn't break away. When I finally banked for home, the sky seemed almost fragile. A sheet of glass stretched across something vast. Morrison met me on the pad, eyes searching mine before they flicked to the empty spot on my flight vest where the badge should have been. I pulled it from my pocket to prove it was still there, warm from my own body. Yet the camera footage later showed what I'd seen, the ring of pale stones, the duplicate badge glinting in the sun. No figure, just the echo of a shape in the light, as if the lens itself had flinched. We never went back officially. The department closed the case under environmental hazard, but I still fly the valley when weather allows. Sometimes I swear I feel that silent pulse ride the rotor wash, faint but steady, a recognition that lingers in the bones of the air. People ask if I believe what I saw. Belief feels too small. The mountain doesn't care about belief. It keeps its own witness, patient and unspeaking, waiting for the next name to carve itself into stone. And every time my skids lift and the horizon tilts, I know the gaze will find me again, older than language, quiet as snowfall, endless as the forest itself.